competition yesterday. And what we're going to do is the two 10-minute presentations. First, Doral College 1, and then Fayetteville State University, those two 10-minute presentations. And then we'll do the two 90-second presentations in a row with Doral and Fayetteville again. Professor Arnold and I will not comment at the end of, until the end of both of those presentations. And let's see, the setup for the 10-minute presentation is as follows. I'm supposed to read this to you so everybody knows what the framework for the 10-minute presentation is. You have been called back by the company you gave your full presentation to yesterday for a second visit. They have asked you to speak only about the ethical aspects of the problem and to explain why your solution successfully handles any ethical issues. You will have 10 minutes. There will be no Q&A, and you may not use slides or video. You probably don't want to have more than 2 or 3 members of your team do this. So that's the setup. I will be the timekeeper with my trusty iPhone. And who will be presenting for Doral College 1?
It would be me and Asa Schlansky.
Okay, so Stephanie and Asa. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to move everyone else off screen for now.
All right. And then who will eventually be presenting for Fayetteville?
It'll be me and Naila, sir.
Desmond, did you say?
Desmond and
Naila first, and then me.
Okay. Naila.
Desmond, and then who's the second one?
Desmond.
Chase?
Naila.
No.
Naila was the first one.
Naila, okay. Got it.
Okay. Is Stephanie going to go first? Be this first speaker for Doral? Okay, I'm going to just get my little 10-minute timer ready, and I will start the timer as soon as you start your first sentence or so.
All right. Okay, got it. Good evening, American Division of TikTok's Board of Directors. I'm Stephanie Martinez.
And my name is Asa Schlansky.
And we are your ethics and law advisors. Firstly, we'd like to thank you for inviting us back to further discuss the ethical dilemmas concerning your company, TikTok, as we attempt to revamp your current moderation system to be more inclusive and less problematic. Before we explain the contours of our plan for TikTok's revitalization, you need a run-through of TikTok's history, which Asa will now dive into.
Now, TikTok is a global phenomenon experiencing tremendous growth and popularity. You've stood out against the competition, becoming the most popular social media app since Snapchat. But it hasn't all been smooth sailing. You've received punitive measures from the government recently, but alongside those punitive measures, TikTok has received an outcry from users and media sources due to their accused censorship of certain groups. Many users of such groups accuse TikTok, citing anecdotal evidence where their content is seemingly shadow banned or the undisclosed removal or hiding of user content. Moreover, these accusations come from groups either directly from or advocating for LGBT, disabled, and poor users. Now, such accusations have not proven positive for TikTok's image. Those users find TikTok blocks their content from other users, preventing their posts and accounts from gaining traction. Now, this is backed by the leaked content moderation policies in which TikTok states its content moderation team should flag and censor such users to prevent others from seeing such posts. TikTok's guidelines for censoring such accounts can be seen as discriminatory on its own, as it provides indicators the moderation team should look for different categories of users. For example, looking for a slight squint or disfigurations to identify people with disabilities such as Down syndrome, and looking for a, quote, shabby and dilapidated background to identify poor users to censor. Now, we do not want you to repeat the same mistakes of Vine, a very similar short viral video platform. Its policies were unclear, and Vine did not invest enough resources into meeting the needs of its user base, such as safe moderation, proper content control, and clear policies. This led to a hemorrhaging of users, then a loss of content. The loss of content resulted in less viewers, which de-incentivized advertising on the platform. We need to change and adapt to the times, not just for the sake of TikTok sustainability as a company, but also out of respect for your users as well.
Now, before presenting our solutions, we want to give you a firm grasp of the ethical issues at hand so that you have a better understanding of the problems to address, but also the reform that we will be recommending to implement in an effort to improve stakeholder satisfaction. Your ethical mission is to maintain TikTok as an online community in which users can create, share, and connect in an environment that is safe and fair. Your main ethical dilemma, on the other hand, is finding that balance between a user's free expression versus creating a safe and controlled platform. In analyzing this case, we want to look at it through the lens of the virtues of user trust, freedom, and platform authenticity. So to address this issue, we've pinned down 4 main ideas to fixate on. 1, explicit community guidelines. 2, censorship reform. 3, implementation of an ethical appeals system. And finally, stakeholder engagement through partnerships with NGOs.
In policymaking, it is important to make distinctions that are clear and consistent. In comparison to other social media platforms, TikTok's guidelines at times feel ambiguous, which leads to a lack of true knowledge and consent by users. Other social media platforms are much more detailed and concise in comparison. They are naturally more lengthy, but truly provide guidelines to be followed on the platform with directly stated consequences if such guidelines are violated.
So first is the topic of integrating these clear and more explicit community guidelines. This lack of expansion on your rules, algorithm function, and consequences of rule violation has led to criticisms by users who felt that they were being marginalized for being of lower class level, LGBT, unconventionally attractive, and/or disabled. While your company did respond that this was with the amiable intention of preventing cyberbullying, it has not been well received. Now, regardless if this is mere speculation, this rumor of reportedly shadow banning is unethical, as it is discrimination and will only push certain user demographics away from your platform. By integrating more explicit community guidelines, your company's moderation systems becomes much more clear. If all of your policies and rules are neatly laid out in an organized page, listing everything about the policy, such as details, rationale, commonly asked questions, and the consequences of rule violations, then your company will have eliminated much of the gray areas in your rules, leaving out clear-cut moderation decisions.
This creates content moderation that is both justifiable and accountable, since everyone knows exactly what the rules are as it is clearly laid out for them. It also enables more knowledgeable consent by users being more informed.
Next is the topic of censorship reform. To address the concern that content is being taken down too hastily, we suggest reformatting what content should be regulated and how.
To allow free expression, we believe that any free speech protected by the American Constitution should be permitted, including controversial political speech. However, content such as pornography, murder, and other mature content will not be allowed at all in order to protect our young users and keep the platform safe. However, visual content that may be deemed sensitive, but serves an educational purpose, such as medical videos, would be permitted, but with the addition of a warning label and physical user consent before lifting the censorship instead of automatically playing. After all, we want to protect our users without being overly restrictive.
That brings us to our third point, implementation of an ethical appeal system. Another complication in your app is that when users do feel that their content was unrightfully taken down, there is no current system of due process. There is no form of user defense that lets users speak their minds to the regulators. Thus, we highly recommend creating an ethical appeal system. By utilizing the Santa Clara principles of transparency and accountability, users would be given the opportunity to appeal content or accounts taken down. Transparency in your platform is essential because it exemplifies virtues of truth. You want your users to trust your platform. In the ethical appeal system that we've designed, unbiased human reviewers would review the case using the additional information provided by the user. They would then be notified of the results and provided sufficient reasoning to allow the user to understand the decision and avoid it happening again. Finally, our fourth and final point is that to aid you in developing policies that are inclusive and accepted by all users, we believe that building partnerships with NGOs would be a worthwhile mutual benefit. It is a form of stakeholder engagement that would help you improve your moderation technique and give a voice to underheard communities, thus incorporating knowledgeable stakeholders in your community guideline reform. They can become your specialized advisors on what would be appropriate moderation. You'd be giving them a platform to promote their cause, and it's a way that you can still protect your users from potential cyberbullying without overstepping. Ultimately, we want to not only fix TikTok's reputation, but protect users' freedom of expression as well. This is why we advise that you follow our guidelines in order to ensure that you maintain your platform's image of being a friendly, positive environment that cares for its users. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you did that with 26 seconds to spare. Thank you, very nicely done. And now we want to turn to Fayetteville and have them do their 10-minute presentation. Good afternoon. We're ready for you to begin your presentation for Fayetteville. And who will speak first? Naila?
Yes, sir, I will.
Okay, as soon as you start, I will press the button for the 10-minute timer.
Good afternoon, Board of Directors of Alphabet Tech Company. My name is Naila Alvarez, and today I, along with my partner Desmond Buckmire, are here from a nonprofit privacy consulting group to continue the conversation with you all about the ethical aspects of COVID-19 and its effects in the privacy trade-off for security. Thank you all for meeting virtually with us today. Before we dive straight in, I would first like to take us back 100 years ago to when a woman by the name of Henrietta Lacks was a patient at Johns Hopkins. Her cells contained unique properties, so the doctors decided to harvest them. Her cells contributed to 3 Nobel Peace Prizes and helped create over 11,000 patents. But what makes Ms. Lacks so special? She never knew about her cell harvestation. She never was compensated, and she never consented. Now, is the idea of allowing big tech companies to store and share personal health data ethical in today's society? According to a survey conducted on over 4,000 adults, 81% reported that they feel as though they have no control over the data that is being kept on them. The majority of these adults surveyed stated that they do not know how their data is being utilized. Although these data companies may have the information related to how they are using and sharing consumer data in both their terms and conditions and privacy policies, It is usually in hard to understand legal terminology. This creates confusion between consumers on data collection, usage, and sharing, making it an unethical practice. When you do a simple Google search of any name, you can find out anything you need to know about an individual. The amount of data that is being collected is remarkable. There is a lot of information available, such as search patterns, search terms, website visits, preferences, online shopping history, date of birth, phone number, social security number, email, friends, contacts, location mapping, banking credentials, and even DNA data. We have to ask ourselves, is collecting this information from consumers harmful in any way? Everybody has private information that they would rather not share with big tech companies. The moment a consumer hits accept on the terms and conditions and on the privacy policy, their information can be shared however the corporation sees fit. We can see this in marketing, especially in advertising. Let's compare this to the COVID-19 pandemic. If an individual feels like they have coronavirus symptoms, they can check these through an online symptom checker before being tested. Once that individual does the symptom checker, all of the personal data is available for the corporation to collect and share. This in turn changes from just checking symptoms to now allowing the individual's location to be tracked and mapped. We have to think about every consumer and whether there is health data that should not be shared between companies. With the HIPAA law, legally, tech companies are only supposed to share the minimal information, such as age group, treatment facility, test results, and the patient's condition. In 2018, California passed the California Consumer Privacy Act. This act required businesses to give consumers the option to opt out of data collection and sharing. California took the first step on making data collection ethically and morally correct. Now I would like to pass this over to my colleague, Mr. Desmond Buckmire, as he will discuss these aspects further, as well as our solutions.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Naila. Since the 9/11 attacks, Americans have felt as though foregoing some liberties and expectations of privacy for the sake of homeland security was necessary. If you compare that with the COVID-19 pandemic today, you will see a few similarities. With public safety and health at the forefront of general concern, the generation of data involving cases of COVID-19, the relatives, associates, and the people infected are of an utmost priority amongst virologists and researchers. Will COVID-19 give enough incentive to lawmakers to make new legislation that involves the collecting of information from victims or families of victims of the deadly virus? If so, we as Americans will be forfeiting more of our privacy rights for the well-being of society. But as of right now, the lack of transparency between data brokerage firms, third-party app developers, and consumers is alarming. The lack of consumer understanding and thorough communication from the businesses involved in data collection leave consumers in more so distrust than in good standing with these companies. Because data is generated, collected, sold, and purchased, a new market has emerged which capitalizes on data generation, and the consumers of whom that data is drawn is never notified. Companies that purposefully make terms of agreements that are lengthy and full of technical jargon understand that most consumers do not read those statements in their entirety or with a complete understanding of the terms. The collection and sale of information like this is unethical. The information that is collected about you may be unsettling, and that information is rarely disclosed to you. Instead, that information is sold and used for other purposes. Furthermore, the proliferation of your information across the internet and through companies leaves the consumer in greater risk of identity theft and potential harm. Alphabet is poised to be a game changer in the marketplace and blaze a trail that is necessary for companies in the data brokerage practice. As a market leader in search engines and software applications, you can show other businesses that you can collect information while being more transparent, and that this will renew your customer trust, establish loyalty, and overall be of the best interest to the stakeholders involved. We have a few solutions to offer you to meet that end that are relatively simple to enact. First, An updated privacy policy for consumers that clearly and succinctly states the kind of information sought from the company and the intended purpose for that info. A business with the amount of corporate power you have can shift the landscape of data collection and renew trust within consumers by making them more aware of your practices. Within the updated privacy policy, an option of having your personal information that has been collected to be disclosed to you should also be available. This increases the integrity and transparency of that company towards their consumers. As my partner mentioned earlier, the CCPA is a legislative catalyst that will require that companies provide the option to consumers to opt out of data sharing. This coincides with our second solution to give users that option to opt out. This could result in changes to the privacy policies used amongst all companies because a plethora of businesses conduct business with Californian entities such as yourself, Alphabet. The option of compensation or incentives for data providers will undoubtedly be something that users would appreciate. This is the third option. Today we have millions of cases similar to Henrietta Lacks. Consumers are sought out for their data that they haphazardly consent to supply, but to no benefit for those consumers. The process needed to compensate users are already in place in a lot of different applications, such as YouTube's compensation methods given to YouTube content creators. These changes to your company would be the least intrusive, easiest, and quickest options to adopt the required changes needed to implement them. In conclusion, let's not repeat history. Let's not leave the ones that provide invaluable, relevant, and real information that could lead to changes or improvements as just donors, patients, or hasty consenters. Henrietta Lacks provided HeLa cells. To say that those cells contributed to modern medical practice is an understatement of the real impact of them. They contributed very largely to the fields of cancer research and vaccinations. In fact, HeLa cells were used to test the first polio vaccination, a disease that is essentially eradicated in the first world. So given today's environment in which data, a practically infinite resource, is so easily created and sold, companies everywhere need to be wary of and administering to the ethics of good practical business. Integrity, honesty, trustworthiness, and transparency are a few of the ethical dimensions that are affected by the data collection market. Furthermore, given the state of crisis that the entire world is in, companies today that collect and share data for the management of COVID-19 must be aware that those consumers provide the data at no expense, compensation, or incentive, as with the other forms of data. The data that is ultimately collected from the masses may be sold by the companies collecting them, and amidst the crisis, legislation regarding the collection and research of data concerning COVID-19 may be enacted. Similar to the national disaster of 9/11, which legislation was enacted, made national security agencies more able to deal with threats from abroad through the gathering of information. By updating your privacy policy to more distinctly state the variety of information that your company collects and the uses of that information, by giving consumers the option to opt out of a privacy agreement that harvests data while still providing access to those services, and by giving incentive or compensation to the consumers who have provided information, you build trust. These actions will be viewed as socially responsible, will increase transparency towards your customers, and will increase not just the monetary value of your firm, but the social value that your firm provides for your stakeholders. Thank you very much for your time.
Well done. Right on time. Very good. Now we want to do the 90-second competition. We'll return to the Doral 1 group, and then we'll come back to you for your 90-second presentation, and then we'll have everybody together for the feedback.
All right. Whoever is going to speak for Doral, if they could raise their hand in chat. Okay, Chase, got it. Should be coming in. There we go.
Oops, I crashed. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No problem.
Am I here now? Can you all see and hear me?
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay, Chase. Hi.
Hi, Chase.
Chase, hang on a second.
I have to give the setup here for the 90-second presentation. Imagine that you are an employee of the company whose case you've been studying. You're at a meeting in which people are discussing the issue. However, no one has brought up ethics. There's a pause in the conversation, and you have 90 seconds in which to convince the other people that at the meeting that there are ethical issues that need to be addressed. You don't have to argue for a solution. You just need them to see that there are serious ethical issues here. One member of the team will do this. So that member is Chase. Go right ahead, Chase.
If I may speak, I genuinely feel we are not talking about something that is incredibly important to the longevity of us as a company. Our guidelines and how they relate to ethics. Our guidelines are facing constant scrutiny, and this is harming us greatly. If this continues, our user base will gradually diminish until we have no more users making content, making our platform completely obsolete. Our lack of inclusivity on the platform is also a question of our ethical policies, as our algorithm seemingly excludes non-conforming individuals. If this continues, we will face the same fate as our previous competitors like Vine. Vine no longer exists because they failed to address issues in a timely manner. They did not address the concerns of their user base or the looseness of their guidelines. Do we desire to fill the role that Vine once did, or do we desire to fill the role that Vine currently has? We are not thinking in the long term when we choose to ignore the many criticisms of our policies and moderation. Eventually, our primary moneymakers, content creators, will get fed up with the inconsistency and lack of clarity. We need to enact solutions now. Not even now. We needed to enact them yesterday. And every day we are waiting is only marching us towards the same fate as Vine. We have something great here as a platform, but we need to change and adapt, or else we will not hold the same relevance as we do currently. That's it.
Thank you, Chase.
Thank you. You did that with 9 seconds to spare.
9 seconds. Very nice.
Thank you very much, Chase. And now we'll go to Fayetteville, and I'll read the setup again because they may not have, well, they probably did hear it the first time I read it, but I'll read it again just in case. Is it Tyshawn will be speaking for Fayetteville? Did you hear me read the setup?
Yes, sir, I did.
You did, so you don't need me to read it again.
No, sir.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Well, as soon as you're ready to start, you just start and I'll press the button for the 90 seconds.
Yes, sir. Board, our Titanic travels towards demise. We've discussed how these solutions save or lose company money, but I pose this. Hearing the story of Henrietta Lacks and considering the position of the world during this pandemic, is business success solely based on the dollar? Financial perspectives of new implications are important, yet we must consider the impacts of our practices, past, current, and future, make on the world. As lead independent director of the audit committee, it has been tasked to my team and I to serve as company watchdogs, improving credibility while mitigating legal, regulatory, and reputational risks. But this responsibility, given the mentioned world environment, should not start with the monetary value, but the ethical one. Then followed by how we can achieve said values using cost-efficient methods, putting our consumers and users' emotions first, remembering they are people before asset creators. Before any more ROIs or profit ratios are conducted, we must tackle the quandaries presented and ask the current info tactics, follow basic ethical principles of respecting others, benevolence, and justice. Doing what's right creates higher value perception, and return more valuable funds for shareholders. In conclusion, why wait to hit the iceberg that is the future government legislation and persistent litigations, demanding policy, practice, and model changes in a quick turnaround potentially costing billions, opposed to implementing proposed solutions now spread out over time only for millions, averting our nearer my God to thee ballot. Now is the time to react. Now is the time for change. Many adverse actions have been taken against us regarding privacy and transparency ethics. It is the year 2020. So what better time than now to restore our vision? Thank you.
Well done.
I apologize for the phone in the background.
That's all right.
Yes.
Thank you, Tyshawn.
Okay. Thank you. And I think we're now in a position to give you some commentary. If we can bring both teams back into the room.
Okay.
All right. If I missed anyone, feel free to raise your hand. We'll promote you up.
Okay, is this the whole group, or are we still missing? We've got Asa, Stephanie.
I think they're all here.
This is everyone, yep.
Okay.
Their advisor's probably watching from the other room.
All right, that's just fine. All right, so the purpose of this time is for Professor Arnold and I to give you some feedback on both your 10-minute and your 90-second presentations. We're not here at this time to suggest who won or lost or came in second or whatever. That decision will be made later. But just to give you feedback on the presentations themselves. And maybe I'll kick it off with the 10-minute presentations of Doral and Fayetteville, and then Professor Arnold can comment on the 10-minute presentations as well. For Doral College 1, it was a very good presentation. It concentrated on the ethical content. The emphasis was on the moderation system and the importance of clarity and ethical clarity in avoiding discrimination, avoiding behind the scenes discrimination, and not being transparent, which are important ethical values. Free expression is another important ethical value. And American Constitution, free expression as understood in the American Constitution was mentioned, which raised an interesting flag for me because TikTok is a Chinese company. And that fact might rub with some difficulty against the American Constitution, because freedom of expression in China is looked at a little differently than it is in America. So that issue is certainly in the background from an ethical point of view. The emphasis on the virtues struck me as particularly important here if you're looking for an ethical framework. And you emphasized user trust, platform authenticity, and free expression as the kind of virtues, and explicitness about community guidelines. One concern that I had, though, was if you put all your ethical freight on the notion of community guidelines, and if the community is off base for whatever reason, are you going to have any leverage against relativism ethical relativism in the framework that you're using. In other words, is there some way to criticize the community's own um, guidelines when they if the community, for example, is prejudiced itself, and the guidelines themselves need to be criticized? Are the community guidelines in and of themselves the ultimate ethical test? Is what I'm getting at. And if you put all your eggs in that basket, then you're stuck with whatever the community gives you. And I think you probably don't want to go that far, because you want to be able to keep some distance between the ethical criterion you use and the community, unless you want to fall into some kind of relativism. So anyway, that was one sort of red flag that went off in my mind. But in general, I thought the presentation on that front went very nicely. Now, shifting to Fayetteville, your emphasis was really exciting to me about data collection and privacy. It's very clear to me what the ethical values and principles at stake were when you gave your presentation. You wanted to make sure that that the provider of data was seen not as a, oh, how did you put it? It was such an excellent phrase. I wrote it down, and now I can't find it here in my notes. But that people are not just assets. Data assets, I think, is the phrase you used, and that they're providing a benefit to the data seeker, and they need to be compensated for what it is that they're providing. So there's a benefit issue here that's an ethical issue, but there's also a privacy rights issue, and rights and costs and benefits are important ethical categories. And I thought that you did a good job of emphasizing that. Let's see, what else did I write down? The importance of an opt-out option, which is a form of respect for the individual. If you don't give the individual an opt-out, you're in effect saying that the individual is not important. The individual is being used, and one of the most famous ethical theories in the world, and we're not supposed to get into technical ethical theories, I know that, but Immanuel Kant's theory about people are supposed to be ends and not means comes into play here. If people's data is being used as a means to a profit end, then that's the opposite of Kant's whole notion of respect for persons. So that was a neat presentation emphasis. We didn't get a clear picture of the COVID-19 relevance. I know that it's timely that's why we're looking at each other on screens. But the relevance of the specific COVID-19 data and how it connects to all the other data that might be available about a person, that linkage wasn't made clear enough to me, anyway, that it would have made the case a little more urgent if an employer had access to the state of an employee's COVID-19 status, whether or not there was some linkage between that and the entire portfolio of an employee's health data, health file. But of course you had only 10 minutes. So But that was a linkage that I was concerned about. Professor Arnold, maybe you would have some things to say about the 10-minute presentations before we go to the 90-second.
Sure. Professor Goodpaster is the lead judge on the 10 minutes, so I will first off say I totally agree with all the great points he made, and I'm just going to add a couple of things. I really, going to Doral first, I thought this was really a nice exposition about the concept of push and pull in ethics, talking about the and unintended consequences. I mean, TikTok talks about wanting to reduce bullying, which is certainly a noble cause, but then at what cost? And that's what your presentation is about. Yes, one thing may be admirable, but you have to look at the other side. And I think that's what business ethics are about. I think that's what IBECC is all about in terms of what we are looking for is where is the gray area? And without gray area, you may not have as much of an ethical argument. and you definitely did, which I really liked. And I liked your explanation of the dilemma, which is free expression versus controlled freedom. I found that to be very, very interesting in the terminology, and boy, I mean, that just opens up tons and tons to discuss, and that's certainly not what we're here for. But I find that to be just so fascinating to think about that. Just to mention a little bit on the presentation itself, I really thought that the back and forth that you had between the speakers was extremely effective. And I think, as you said to me in the beginning, before we had even started, if I were your advisor and you said, can we do back and forth, I might have wondered if that's going to be too much. But I thought the way that you handled it was absolutely excellent. And I did not feel that it chopped it up as I would have been concerned. So I congratulate you on your ability to do that in a way that enhances the presentation rather than adding confusion to the presentation. So I really enjoyed that as well. I will leave it at that for the 10-minute, and then we'll move on to the 90-second for you. And then now we'll go on to Fayetteville, another very nice presentation. I think you brought up some things that we haven't really seen enough of yet, and I think that what you're saying about this being an opportunity to not repeat the past and not repeat past mistakes is extremely well taken. And the comparison to 9/11 and saying how we did give way to foregoing some liberties was okay in that case. And what's going to happen after COVID-19 is over? What's going to be the difference? One is it's a different scenario. One is about not being physically attacked. The other is however I don't know what, we're going to have new words coming up about after COVID-19 is over. And it's a different kind of terrorism, so to speak. And so I really like the idea of what new laws are going to result from this. I also really liked your idea of compensating consumers. I thought that's a really interesting concept to bring up, and that is, if I don't check the right boxes, if I don't read the fine print, which I never do, and neither does anybody else, as you mentioned, what rights do you have to use my data? And the idea of compensating consumers, I think, would very quickly make some changes in how things are done in media and big data world. But that's something we could probably talk about a little more, because this is business. I'm giving you something and I want something in return. So I think that's also great. I thought both presentations were very well done, and you're very good speakers, and it was a pleasure to listen to you. So that's what I have to say about the 10-minute.
Okay, thank you.
Professor Goodpaster, do you want to give some?
Yes, one of the things that I look for in these 10-minute presentations, and I write it down in my notes before you even speak, is was the presentation thoughtful? Did people give reasons for their conclusions? And were they confident about their subject? Those are the two questions I look for. Did they give reasons? And were they confident about their subject? And both of you came up with a yes from me on those two questions. So I just wanted you to know
Me
that.
too. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now the 92nd. Why don't you take the lead on that one, and I'll follow Professor Arnold.
Okay. The 90-second ones are always interesting because they really force you to think about what is it I'm going to do in a very short period of time. And one of the reasons we really like this exercise at IBECC is that it becomes very real world, because it asks you the question, if given the opportunity or given the space in a conversation, how can you speak up? How can you speak up about ethics? How can you make your point in a very short period of time? That's where the courage comes up in ethical situations, when other people aren't talking about it or they're making assumptions about it without talking about it. And that's where we run into problems, because sometimes we think everybody understands what is and what isn't ethical, but that's just not true. There's just so much gray area, and you run into problems where if you assume that people are agreeing on it, they're not. And so this is a wonderful exercise in coming up with a succinct argument that you can courageously throw into a situation. Chase, what I really liked about what you talked about was, I felt like you were really speaking to me as a business person. You showed how, and not only that, but you showed how ethics can contribute to better business. And that's an important thing to think about. If you only go in and talk about this is the right thing to do, that's a very important piece as well. But depending on your audience, tying it into more closely to business and how it presents opportunities and not just things that are onerous to business, I think is very, very well done. And I think, Chase, you did a really nice job with that. Tyshawn, I really liked how you started with the ethics piece, and you talked about how important it is to look at people before assets, which is Kant and a few others as well. And you also made a really good point about getting ahead of things, getting ahead of some of the issues that are out there, and being a trailblazer in this area. And of course, there's the idea of the restoration of the business as well. And you definitely, both of you drew my attention. If I were in a meeting and you said, "Hey, wait, people, wait," I would want to listen to you. I would want to listen to what you said, because I would want to listen to because you come across intelligently. You did not come across as people that just want to talk and hear their own voices. You brought authenticity to it, and I really thought that in both cases, very, very well done. Professor Goodpaster?
Well, thank you, Professor Arnold, and I concur with your observations. That last one was very well taken. You really did. If I were in a group and you stood up and said, "Hey, there's an ethical issue here," I would have listened to you. You have that presence that commands a certain amount of attention, and you should make good use of that in your career futures, and use it well. In the TikTok case, there was a certain urgency that you were communicating, Chase. We don't want to go the way of Vine. We don't want to go down that path. There's an urgency here, and it has to do with ethics. It has to do with, if you will, the ethics of inconsistency. And we owe it to our user base to be more transparent than we have been. Otherwise, we're going to go down the same path as Vine went, and ethics has consequences, or lack of ethics has consequences. And I mean, it took you 90 seconds to get that point through, but you got it through. So that was nicely done. And Tyshawn, after your 90 seconds, the thing that kept echoing in my mind was people, they're people before asset creators. That was the phrase I think you used. And that's as core an ethical principle as I can think of. First, they're people, then they're asset creators. An asset creator, I think you meant by that data deliverers. I mean, donors of data. And but the donor of data is a person, and you got to recognize the person first. And I thought that was a powerful message. It emphasized dignity over utility. And so you both had urgency in your message. That's, I guess, the thing that struck me. And in 90 seconds, if it was just urgency, it wouldn't be enough. There has to be content to that urgency, and you gave content to the urgency. And so you're really making it tough on Professor Arnold and me, and I resent that deeply. No, you did a fine job, and I hope you found these comments useful. Do you have any questions? Feel free to ask them.
I do not have any questions, but I would like to thank the judges for you all's time today. I would like to thank the other panelists for the presentation that you gave as well. And one thing that I emphasize to our team at Fayetteville State University is, regardless of any rankings or regardless of any awards that we may or may not be given, as long as we've learned something from this experience and better ourselves, then we've already won. So I would like all of us to take that home with us. And well, we're already at home, but keep that in consideration.
Well, that's a wonderful sentiment to close with. You're all winners already, and
under some circumstances that certainly are not optimal. I just thought the way you embraced the technology and didn't step away from it, I thought was just excellent. I do hope that next year, when we will be back with IBECC, we certainly hope it will be in Boston or another live avenue. And for those of you that are not graduating, I hope you'll join us again. For those of you who are graduating, I hope that you will speak about IBECC to some of the folks in your organization. And we would love to have people and teams from your organization again. So thank you for coming to IBECC and helping us make our 23rd year. Yes, our 23rd year a major success, and we'll hope to see you on Monday night.
Yes, look forward to seeing you again Monday.